And we got to talk about this, right? Why is God hardening Pharaoh's heart? Isn't that kind of like rigging the game? Well, this is a tough one because it's a lot bigger than just our boy Pharaoh. This actually speaks to how we imagine the interaction of the human and the divine. And the Hebrew perspective, as is often the case, is going to leave us a little bereft of concrete answers, so strap in. But I'm going to turn primarily to the Jewish scholar Nahum Sarna on this one. For one, he's quite brilliant. But two, he's obviously, I think, a lot closer to the Hebrew way of thinking through these passages. But he points out that the hardening of Pharaoh's heart occurs exactly 20 times in Exodus. In Exodus 7, 13, 14, 22, 8, 15, 19, and 32, 9, 7, 34, and 35, and then again in chapter 13, verse 15, the hardening refers to an essential character of the man Pharaoh. So, for example, Exodus 8:15 says that Pharaoh hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses. But then in Exodus 4:21, 7:3, 9:12, 10:1, 20 and 27, 11:10, and then again in 14:4, 8, and 17, the hardening this time is done by God. For example, in verse 14:4, our verse here, God said, "I will harden Pharaoh's heart." So 10 times Pharaoh hardens his heart, 10 times God hardens it back. And there's actually 3 different words that are used across these various references. There's kaved, which is to dull, chazak, which is to strengthen, and kasha, which means to become obstinate. And both are used on either side of this God-Pharaoh divide, so that doesn't really help us much either. Still, it seems far too convenient to see 20 references over 10 chapters with 10 going one way and 10 going the other way to think that this is not part of an intentional structuring of the story. Someone has taken great pains to say something here. So, what are they trying to say? Well, first, we need to know that your heart does not mean your emotions in Hebrew literature, not the way we think about it. That's your bowels. You feel things in your gut. In Hebrew thought, you think things in your heart, in your chest. So you feel it here, but you decide here. That's really important. Because whatever is going on in Pharaoh here is not about his feelings. A detour. My son, who is in grade 4 and has very big and very wonderful emotions, came home from school this week. And before he got home, we had gotten an email from his teacher. See, she had read a book in the class that day, and the chapter involved a sad story about a family having to put down their family dog. Well, as she was reading, she cried, and then some kids cried, and she wanted to make sure that as parents, we were ready if students wanted to come home and talk about the emotions they were feeling that day. A very kind email, actually. So my son, who gets emotional about every movie, every story we ever see, my son who watches the movie Real Steel with Hugh Jackman and a boxing robot and cries every time the little boy cheers on his dad, this kid comes home and says to me, "Yeah, it was a sad story, Dad, but I didn't cry. I'm not like other kids. I guess I just don't have emotions. I'm built different." I was like, slow down, Vin Diesel. Do you need me to put on the Paw Patrol movie so we can both cry when that little puppy is left alone in the city with no one to fend for him? This is not about a lack of emotions, okay? Pharaoh has big feelings, just like my son. He has a lot of emotions. He's scared the Israelites might revolt. He's disgusted by these slaves that are not like him. He's humiliated when these foreigners show up as court magicians. He is heartbroken when his son dies. This language of hardening is not about those feelings. It's about what he does with them. And that's important for all of us to hear. Because you and I, we can't always control our emotions and what we feel. In fact, rarely can we. But we can control what we do with them. And Sarna describes this as a descent into arrogant moral degeneracy, unresponsive to reason and therefore incapable of compassion. And First of all, that's just a great quote, by the way. But Sarna uses this frame of descent here because, as he points out, in the first 5 plagues, Pharaoh's hardening, all of it is self-willed. He does it to himself. And it's only after he chooses that path for himself that the hardening is then later attributed to divine causality. And that framework finds its way all through the scriptures, right? Paul talks about God giving us over to our worst desires. And Jesus talks about those who refuse to forgive becoming unable to be forgiven. Exodus talks about those who harden their hearts, having their hearts hardened. And at a very practical level, I think this makes sense to me about my experience of the world. I mean, I think even about those words that are used here in the Hebrew, kaved, to dull, chazak, to strengthen, kasha, to become obstinate. Often, when I have just really decided that I want something, that sounds a lot like me. And by the way, anyone who knows me well can just remain silent right now. It's not the time to say amen, Rachel. This is the problem, right? Dull to the concerns around me, strengthened in the resolve to follow my own way, obstinate and headstrong in the pursuit of my goals. It's incredibly easy for some of the things that I appreciate, I love about myself, to become twisted and toxic if I'm not paying attention to how I'm using them. And I think what the scriptures are trying to tell us is that there's a spiritual dimension to all of that. God has given me certain attributes, certain parts of my personality, you as well. And when I steward them well, they are God's gift to me. But when I abuse them and I misappropriate them against people, they can become God's judgment on me. Sometimes in life, you will get what you want, and the only difference between it being a blessing or a curse is how you shaped your desire in the first place. And that is a sobering reality when oftentimes I find myself chasing things that are just not well aligned with the kind of person that I truly want to be. Am I hardening my heart? Or is God giving me what I think I want? And is there really a difference there?